Hello boys and girls. Today we will be working on lesson 7.7, comparing fractions by using visual models. For today's activity, you're going to need Math Journal page 235. It's also a good idea to take out some of your number lines that you created last week to help you compare these fractions. Some optional journal pages you might want to try to continue to keep your math skills up to snuff are page 236 and 237. Let's start with some quick looks. Ready? 1, 2, 3. What fraction did you see? That's right. Half of the circle was filled in, or 2/4. So you might have noticed either one because 2/4 and 1/2 are equivalent. Let's try this one. 1, 2, 3. What fraction did you notice this time? You might have noticed 2 halves are colored in, or the whole is colored in gray. Last one. 1, 2, 3. What fraction did you see this time? That's right, about 1/2. Some of you might also be noticing that this kind of looks like the 1/4 piece when our whole is a circle. But in this actual picture, 1/2 is white and 1/2 is gray. Here's today's math message. Which of the shapes above shows a shaded part that's less than 1/2? Which one shows a shaded part greater than 1/2? Which one shape shows a shaded part that is about 1/2? Here's what you should have thought about. The rectangle has less than half shaded in. The circle has more than 1/2 shaded in. And the triangle is almost about 1/2. Can you compare the shaded parts of each shape to one another? Think about the shapes before you answer. That's right, you can't. To compare fractions, the whole must be the same size. Clearly, rectangles, circles, and triangles are not the same size. Here's our key word for today: benchmark. A benchmark is used to compare fractions on number lines. Common benchmarks that we will work with today are 1/2, 0, and 1. Again, benchmarks we are using today are 1/2, 0, and 1. Then, by using fraction circles on number lines on fraction cards. So you have my fraction number line here, where 0, 1/2, and 1 are marked. Let's practice. How can we tell if one fraction is greater than or less than another fraction? 1/3 is what compared to 1/4? Here are my two number lines. One is thirds, one is fourths. Here is 3/3 and 4/4. This is where 1 would be marked as our benchmark on each number line. Then I have 6/3 and 8/4. This would be 2 holes on each number line. I double checked that to make sure that my number lines are using the same holes. Now that I know where 0 is and where 1 is as my benchmarks, I can try to compare these. Which one do you think is greater, 1/3 or 1/4? I'm noticing that 1/3 is to the right of 1/4 just a little bit, or 1/3 is farther from 0 and closer to 1. That tells me that 1/3 is greater than 1/4. We could also look at it as 1/4 is closer to 0. So 1/4 is less than 1/3. Which fractions are equivalent to 1/2? This would be a good time, if you have this number line poster from last week, to take it out. I've also got myself a straight edge. Just like last week, I can line up the 1/2 with other fractions on the number line to see which ones are equivalent. All of the fractions that are in line with 1/2 are the same distance from 0 on each number line. If 1/2 and 2/4 are equivalent, how can I use the fourths number line to find fractions that are less than 1/2? That's right. Fractions that are less than 1/2 are going to be closer to 0 than the 1/2 fraction is. Do you see which fraction is there? Right, 1/4 is less than 1/2. Using the fourths number line again, can you find a fraction that's greater than 1/2? Remember, our benchmarks are 0, 1/2, and 1. Anything to the right of 1/2 is going to be greater than the 1/2 fraction. 3/4, for example, is to the right of 1/2. 3/4 is a greater distance from 0 than 2/4. 3/4 is also closer to our 1 benchmark. Please take out Math Journal page 235 and complete the fraction benchmarks chart at the top of the page. You're going to find some fractions that are less than, equal to, or greater than the 1/2 benchmark. Try to come up with a couple for each box. Again, using benchmarks like 0, 1/2, and 1 can help us to compare fractions. How do the fractions 1/4 and 1/8 compare to 1/2? If we look at where all of our points are, we should be able to notice which fraction is closer to 0. Put your finger on the fraction that's closest to 0. That's right, 1/8 is closest to 0. Both 1/4 and 1/8 are to the left of 1/2. They're both closer to 0 than 1/2 is. Let's try to compare these. 1/8 is closer to 0 than 1/4 is, so 1/8 is less than 1/4. Let's try 3/4. Here's 3/4 and 1/8. Again, 1/8 is closer to 0 than 3/4. 3/4 is closer to our 1 benchmark, so 3/4 is greater than 1/8. At this time, you should be able to pause this video and complete Math Journal page 235. For extra practice comparing fractions using visual representations, you can do one of two things, or even both. First, you can play Top It fractions with pictures. Remember to use your number lines as a tool to help you, along with the benchmarks 0, 1/2, and 1. This way you can see how not only the pictures, but also fraction number lines help you to compare fractions. The second activity that you can do is comparing and ordering fractions. The directions are listed below. To model, I've created a version on the screen. Let's pretend that I'm playing this on my floor. The first thing you will need are index cards or cut up pieces of paper labeled with our benchmarks 0, 1/2, and 1. You'll want to put those in a line on your floor with an equal distance between each one. Then you're going to need a die. This can be from a game board you have at home, like Monopoly, or it can be from the e-toolkit on ConnectEd. You're going to roll the dice twice. So I got a 4 and a 6. Then you're going to use those two numbers to make your fraction. The greater number should be your denominator. 6 is greater than 4, so that's going to be my denominator, and my other roll was a 4, so that's going to be my numerator. You will also write this on a new card or piece of paper. The next step is to determine where on the number line your new fraction would go. Is 4 6 closer to 0, closer to 1/2, greater than 1/2, or closer to 1? You might want to use one of your other fraction number lines to assist you. You'll repeat this 6 times. Good luck and happy comparing!